All right, so through the rest of the lesson, we're really going to look at how the idea of monomers and polymers and other concepts from organic chemistry play out in the chemistry of life in all the molecules that make up living things. All the molecules we're going to talk about today are things that you might recognize from food or that you might have heard about in relation to your own body, but they're really universal for all living things. So they are what make up bacteria, they are what make up plants, they are what make up humans, they are what make up all animals and fungi. So these are really universal chemical things that we see throughout biology. So when we talk about a biomolecule, we're really talking about any kind of organic molecule that makes up living things. You might recognize a lot of these words like carbohydrate, DNA, protein, fat, cholesterol, vitamins. You might not have heard the word lipid before, but we'll talk about what that means. In this video, we are going to focus on carbohydrates, proteins, and nucleic acids. These are three types of biomolecules that we will see that monomer and polymer pattern showing up in their structure. So if you look at these three pictures, you can see that idea that I just explained to you about monomers and polymers. Like sugar is a monomer, and sugar molecules can make long chains that we call polysaccharides. Amino acids are a monomer. They can make long chains that we call proteins. Nucleotides are a monomer. They can make up long chains that we call nucleic acids. So we are going to take a couple minutes to look at each one of these one by one. Let's start with sugar. Sugars actually can be technically called monosaccharides, and then the polymer of sugars is called a polysaccharide. So again, like right there in the names, you see those prefixes. Mono means one, poly means many. These two things together are what we call carbohydrates. So if you look on a nutrition label and you see the word carbohydrate, it will tell you how much sugar is in that food. It will tell you how much fiber is in that food. Fiber is a type of polysaccharide. If it says it has a lot of carbohydrates, but it doesn't really have much sugar or much fiber, then that means it probably has a lot of starch, which is a type of polysaccharide. So you guys, I'm sure, know that sugar shows up in sweet foods like desserts and fruits and all those kinds of things. The main polysaccharide we're going to talk about here is starch, which is what you would find in potatoes and grains and because like rice and wheat, and so then starch shows up in things like cereal and bread and pasta. And you don't think of something like a potato as being sugary, but when you eat potatoes, your body digests it and breaks it down into sugar. And so that's why, sugar and the carbohydrates that make up a potato kind of show up in that same category of chemistry. So here's some actual chemical drawings of those structures. The simplest, most common sugar that you'll see again and again when you take biology is glucose. And you might have heard this, especially if you know someone who's diabetic. People who are diabetic have to monitor their blood glucose levels because glucose is the form of sugar that circulates in your bloodstream. It has like a hexagon-shaped ring, and so that's why in this picture of starch, you can see that hexagon colored in red, or that's why these blue hexagons are up here, because glucose is a hexagon-shaped molecule with carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. And then starch, which is, like I said, the molecule that makes up things like potatoes and bread and pasta, is just a long chain of those glucose molecules, and when you eat it, in your mouth and in your intestines, it gets broken down into sugars, and then those can be absorbed into your bloodstream. So that's carbohydrates. Moving on, let's look at amino acids. Amino acids are another type of monomer. Remember, monomers are small molecules, so they, just like how glucose here, has about 24 atoms in it. Amino acids are also pretty small. You'll notice some functional groups in this molecule. There's the amine group. That's why it's amino, because you got this amine functional group. And then the acid part of the name comes from this carboxylic acid functional group. The reason that it's acidic is because when it goes in water, this hydrogen will break off, and then, that's how we define acids, by that they produce hydrogen ions. And so usually when this is dissolved in water, that hydrogen is actually not there. So that's an amino acid. You might be wondering about this R. So there are 20 different amino acids. Notice that this part of the structure is always the same. You have the amine group and the carboxylic acid group. You have this carbon in the middle, but then this picture highlights all the different little the part of the molecule that can be different. So some amino acids have more of like a hydrocarbon piece there, and so then they're nonpolar because carbon and hydrogen have pretty similar electronegativity. There are some amino acids that are polar, either because they have an alcohol group on them or they have an amine group there, and then remember those can form hydrogen bonds. And so some of the amino acids are polar, and then some of them have negative or positive charges. So they all have this same basic structure, but there's 20 different ones that all have like slight differences to their structure, and then these are the names of those different amino acids. So essentially, these 20 little molecules are the building blocks for what we call protein. This picture kind of represents the idea of a protein being a polymer, but that all the monomers are a little bit different. Unlike, like we saw with starch, that starch is just a chain of glucose. It's like identical glucose molecules over and over again. With a protein, you basically have like 20 different little building blocks that you can combine into chains of different lengths and different orders of them. How the amino acids are sequenced has a lot to do with what the protein will do in the cell. This is something that we'll cover a lot in biology, but I kind of just put a circle around this amino acid so you could kind of picture, like in this picture, each of these different colored circles, that's one amino acid, like from this chart. And then ultimately what happens is that this long chain folds up into some kind of shape that then allows it to do some kind of job for the cell. So again, you'll get into like how proteins work more in biology, but it's a lot more than just like making you strong or giving you energy, which is something usually people think of because you think of like, oh, proteins help me build my muscle, or I eat food with protein in it so that I can be healthy. You eat food with protein in it so that you can get these amino acid building blocks, because when you eat protein, you break it down into amino acids, and then your cells can like recombine those building blocks to kind of build all their machinery. So more on that in biology. For right now, as a chemistry student, I just want you to recognize, to be able to see some of these functional groups you've seen before in the amino acid structure, and to know that an amino acid is a monomer and that it can make up polymers called proteins. Lastly, let's look at nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are a type of polymer made up of a monomer called nucleotides. This is like a way more complicated looking monomer than any of the other ones you've seen. It actually has a sugar, but then like other stuff bonded to it. But this is a really important type of monomer because probably the main nucleic acid you've heard of before is DNA. The Na in DNA stands for nucleic acid. So you've probably seen pictures of DNA that look like this. What I want you to imagine, so that we can kind of see how this chemical structure plays out in DNA, is imagine taking this like twisted ladder thing and you untwist it. Then you get this sort of ladder shape. So DNA has like a ladder shape to the molecule. And then this is obviously very simplified. This diagram up here, obviously very simplified. But the reason that these monomers have this kind of T shape here is because the DNA molecule has it's shaped sort of like a zipper with like backbones, and then it's like zipped up in the middle. So if you look at this monomer here, you'll notice how those play out in this structure over here. So there's one nucleotide. So on this picture, the like little blue part there is this, and then the red part there is the nitrogenous, what's called the nitrogenous base. That's actually where the code of the DNA is held. Again, something you will learn a lot about in biology. But notice how that nucleotide thing repeats over and over down this chain, and then also repeats over and over on this side too. So DNA basically is like two polymers that are like zipped together in the middle like a zipper. So like the details of this are not something that we're going to expect you to know in chemistry, but when you see this again in biology, hopefully it'll look familiar to you, and you can see, looking from these pictures, how this molecule repeats itself over and over again in the structure of the DNA molecule. And then, when you look at this picture, you can see how there's sort of like a backbone almost like the rungs of the ladder, and then these parts join together in the middle like steps of the ladder. All right, so just to wrap up, what I hope that you're taking away from this video is that many molecules in our food and in our bodies have monomers and polymers, with the key main examples being carbohydrates, such as sugar and starch, proteins, which are a polymer made up of amino acids, and nucleic acids like DNA, which are made up of monomers called nucleotides.